Okay, so let me just first address the elephant in the room, which is this weird lighting that we got going on. It's winter, it's the new year, hence why I'm even doing this video. So yeah, my lighting situation is dreadful. I've got a window next to me there, which is kind of why this is going on. But like, there's nowhere good to film in this flat. I need to kind of work out some good filming spaces for when I'm doing actual sit-down videos rather than just like my usual vlogs. And even just incorporating them into my vlogs as well. I feel like that would be just better in general anyway. But yes, Happy New Year, everybody. It's late, I know. This time last week, when everybody else was posting their videos, I was grinding away at 2 full software assignments for my university because I'm doing a degree in software engineering, whilst also working a full-time job and also trying to make YouTube happen for me, which, I mean, I'm not putting in the right amount of effort for it to be happening for me, so this isn't on you guys. It's not on you. It's not on you at all. But thank you for being here anyway. But yes, I read 120 books somehow, which, comparing it to 2020, which was 20 books, I feel really accomplished. Like, especially with everything else going on as well. Like, I got into reading in like the biggest way possible, and I'm aiming for 125 this year. God knows why I've decided that, but I have. I just love the amount that I'm reading. I feel like it's a really good escape, and now I own a lot more books. As you can see from my lovely bookshelf, which is completely disorganized, but actually fits all my books in somehow, just apart from that one book that's just sitting on top of some other books that looks really out of place. I guess that's a New Year's thing as well. I'm gonna need to get some more bookshelves. But yeah, I need to get through those books, and I feel like if I'm gonna do that, also keep up with my book clubs and all that sort of stuff, 125 is a good number. But looking back on 2021, it was a crazy year of reading. I read a lot of random stuff. I read a lot of new favorites, and I have a top 10 for you. It was very nearly a top 12 because I like the idea of doing like a here's the top 10% to kind of make it different. Editing back here. It was totally a list of 12, not a list of 10. I am just an idiot, and the title is not wrong, I promise you. I mean, technically I've got 11 books on here, so we can kind of call it the top 10%. You'll see when I get into it. This is my top 10 for 2021. This is the books I read in 2021. I don't think any of them came out in, no, one book on this list I think came out in 2021. So, oh, 2, wow, I feel accomplished. So 2 of these actually came out in 2021, the rest did not. So don't expect crazy, all the new books. You've probably read half of these already. Yeah, this is just what I thought of the reading that I did in 2021. I already need a drink, hold up. Gotta get myself something. Orange squash, because I'm 12, but here we go. Number 10. So when I was originally making this list, I was really only looking at my 5 stars for the year, and there were some that were on the list of 5 stars that aren't in this list. But something I kept coming back to in the time since I've read it, maybe because of my job and all that sort of stuff, was The Phoenix Project by Jean Kim. It's a fictional story of a company learning to treat their internal IT operations as if it was a manufacturing chain and using DevOps procedures and all that sort of stuff. It sounds really boring to people who don't work in that sort of environment, so I'm very sorry, but it stuck with me so much. I'm kind of at the moment in a work rotation where I'm doing a lot of business operation stuff. I read it at just like the perfect time because it had so much management and project management and change management sort of stuff in it that I felt like it had an impact on my job without me even realizing it. When I'm doing stuff now, I think of the book, and so, you know, I just feel like it's been an important one for me, so I have something to thank there. For those of you who aren't in like IT, I don't necessarily know if I'd recommend it. Like, the story's fine, but it is very business centric. There isn't really, like, your protagonist doesn't really have really much else going on. Like, you know he has a family, but there's not really much of that. Like, it is really centered around this business. But if you are in IT at all, in any aspect at all, I would recommend it. I want to read the second one this year, which is more software centered as opposed to the management side of things. I don't know what to say to you guys. Like, it's a very weird book to have on my list because it's almost like a textbook, but it reads like a novel. And then at the end of it, you've got like a textbook. It's a very weird like scenario. I feel like it had a great deal of impact on my work, so I put it at number 10. I've realized I picked 12 books. In my head I was thinking I narrowed it down to 10, but I actually picked 12. So this is number 12. I'm very sorry. At least now I can do my cool little 10% title being unique and stuff. It's all over the place today. Can you tell I'm recording this in a lunch break? Book 11, which is higher than the last one even though I said 10. So especially towards the beginning of the year, I read a heck of a lot of books that were craft books about writing. I got through a good lot of them. I read through On Writing Well, I read some of Chris Fox's books, and some more about like self-publishing specifically, as well as like Save the Cat writes a novel and that sort of thing. But I feel like the one that stuck with me, and the one I feel like I'm gonna like religiously keep rereading, is Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg. This one is written as a collection of short essays, which I feel like was really easy to digest as well. And instead of it being about how you write, it was more about the habit of writing and the practice of just putting pen to paper, which I feel like was really good, because I wouldn't say I necessarily struggle making sure my words are good. I just don't write enough at the moment. I'm not saying that my work is brilliant at all, but I'm not at the stage where I want to be critically analysing what I've written because I'm not getting down the words in the first place. So I feel like this was a really nice way to kind of introduce the idea of a real writing ritual. You hear about it in some other craft books. I know that 5,000 Words Per Hour by Chris Fox goes into it a little bit, and some other books do as well, but this really focused on the ritual of writing and gave you all these different ideas of ways to just exercise your writing muscles. And that's why I liked it, and I need to give it a reread in the next couple of months because I really want to get back into writing. I haven't had time to recently, and yeah, I just want to get back into it. I have a load of ideas of stuff I want to write, and it's just going to be about getting it down and getting that ritual back. So yeah, probably a reread of this one in the near future. Number 10, the actual number 10 this time. So I wasn't expecting to have so many young adult novels on this list, mainly because I feel like in a lot of cases I feel like I kind of read young adult books and I kind of roll my eyes at some of the characters because I feel like they are a bit over exaggerated in terms of their emotions. I suppose that is the way teenagers are, and I once was, but I do find that some of the more mature themes in YA is what keeps me interested. And I think that's why I have this particular book on the list, which is Blood Like Magic by Liselle Sambury, who happens to be an author-tuber, if those of you who are watching this don't know. I think at one point she released a video that was her creating the house that she had in mind for this family of witches in The Sims. So it was a really fun thing to go back and look at after I'd read the book. But this book tells the story of Voya, who has to go on a quest to receive her powers as a blood witch, and she lives in this big family house who I believe are of Caribbean descent, and the family dynamic of that. And it was just really interesting. I think the family dynamic was the most interesting part of it. I loved the way they all communicated, and there was this matriarch at the very top of the family, and very similar to Encanto. If you've seen that movie recently, I literally saw it like 2 days ago. Loved it. It feels very much like that. There is a lot more of a darker turn to it, and I really enjoyed that too. But if you're into YA at all, especially like fantastical YA or speculative YA, I'd give this a go. Number 9, another YA book. I think we've got 3 of these in a row, so look forward to that. So my number 9 is Illuminae by Amie, Kaufman and Kristoff. This was the most unique book series I read all year. Mainly because it's one of those, you know, found documents sort of books. It's just documents. And I really loved it. I got through it really nice and quickly, so it felt really fast paced. I got through all 3 books within the space of a weekend, and then got the novella, which was like the prequel. They only had an ebook of that, unfortunately, but I still read through that probably same weekend. Illuminae is probably the best of the 4. Maybe the novella prequel. I didn't really like some of the tenuous endings of all these books, but it felt so unique. It didn't feel like reading, really. It felt like something completely different. I felt like I was almost a part of it, and I was like solving this mystery even though I wasn't solving anything. it was just a fun experience, and I think I'd happily go back and experience all that again. Even though it did feel a little bit immature at parts, I felt like I could get past it because it was so engaging. Number 8. This one, it was a pretty obvious one for me when it comes to YA. Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I just really enjoy Brandon Sanderson's writing. I found it really difficult not to put either The Final Empire or Words of Radiance on this list as well, because they were just so good as well. But I felt like I would have way too much Brandon Sanderson on this list. So it's pretty obvious to me that Brandon Sanderson is one of my favourite writers, but I didn't put too much on here. Like, I didn't put any of his Cosmere books on here for the simple reason, like, I'm always gonna know that they're good. You'll always hear me recommend them, I'm sure. I wanted to put his YA book on this list because I just had a wild ride with this. It is the story of Spencer. She wants to be a pilot, and she is not allowed to be a pilot because of something her father did when she was a kid, and it kind of tackles the expectations of people that people put on you by coming from a particular bloodline. You know, people expect the same of you that they probably expected from your parents unless you're able to prove otherwise, and it was all about her kind of proving that. And there was a really interesting progression of her character. She was a brat to begin with, and I almost put the book down because I really hated her so much, but I'm glad I didn't, because it just shows how much Brandon is able to craft a character into a likability. I feel like it probably wouldn't be so bad when you're younger. Like, there's a lot of angst in that book, so maybe for the target audience this was like the perfect character progression, but I almost didn't stick it out. But I feel like having done so, it was so satisfying to see her be all she could be. And this year I'm definitely going to pick up Starsight and Cytonic, which are the 2 next books in the series, and maybe pick up the Skyward Flight novellas if they come out in a physical form. Maybe. I don't know. I like Brandon Sanderson. I could probably dedicate a whole shelf in my library to Brandon Sanderson, but that's enough of me raving about him for now. Hint there. Number 7. So number 7 on this list is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is the story of a woman who has worked in a convenience store since she was at college, and how everyone around her is pressuring her to become a housewife, to have kids, and she doesn't want that. She feels like this is where she wants to be, and she also kind of deals with the feeling of not being a person. Mental traits that kind of mean that she likes to project the character of others onto herself, and where she's in the convenience store she feels comfortable. At home she projects the values of the company and has done for 10 years and all that, and she doesn't have a way to really be herself, whatever that is underneath everything. And it's funny, it's weirdly like hard-hitting, especially if, like me, you kind of struggle sometimes in social situations and with social expectation. That's why it's on my list. Like, it kind of deals with that in a way that's funny and like off in like the best way. So I highly recommend it to any of you, especially if you are like me in that kind of that social awkwardness bracket, you know. Number 6 is back again. It's Brandon Sanderson. Again, not a Cosmere book, but this time around I am talking about Legion, The Many Lives of Stephen Leeds. And this is so high up on my list because it felt like the natural succession to the Stephen Moffat show Sherlock. I grew up with Sherlock and that era of Doctor Who. This is a man, Stephen Leeds, who is a detective, but he suffers mentally. He kind of sees other people where there's not other people, and they're all, in theory, they're manifestations of his personality, but they're all very unique characters. And then one's like an absolute know-it-all when it comes to guns and that sort of thing, and there's men and there's women, and some of them have romantic relationships, and it's very odd and also very cool, and everyone has a distinct voice whilst also almost feeling like they're from the same person, which is really interesting. And the concept of like becoming an expert at something and then manifesting an expert personality in your head because you can't contain all that knowledge. Whew, so interesting. I really enjoyed this, and I'm so glad that there's another story coming next year. So in love with this story. Someone has to read this so I can talk to someone about it. Number 5. This is where we're getting into the real books. Like, these are now on my favourites list, sort of. These are gonna be lifelong favourites. And the first one of these that I want to talk about is How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. And this is just, it just made me feel warm. It was like a hug. This is the story of a boy and his uncle. And the boy is living his life, making friends, understanding the world around him. And he'll write to his uncle, and his uncle will kind of explain some aspects of his life and his social situations in the form of philosophy and social theory. It sounds really boring, and it does, because I've explained it to other people and they're just like, oh, it's just, maybe it's not for me. But it's heartwarming because, like, this child is growing up and sometimes his instinct is to run away from certain situations, but he faces them and all this sort of stuff, and his uncle is there trying to raise him right because he lost his father. And yeah, it's just like the biggest hug. You know, this kid's gonna be a good kid, and you're just like, ah. Like, if you've got even like the tiniest inkling of like a parental instinct in your body, like, I feel like you're gonna love it. So yeah, I just would recommend this to everybody. And it's amazing because this was written in the 1930s and it was only very recently translated into English. But it's amazing how it all just remains relevant, because social interaction, despite social media and all this sort of stuff, remains the same. We'll see in 20 years when all our kids that grew up on iPads are adult, but for now, still remains relevant. So yeah, I love this book. Number 4, second in the chain of books that were basically recommended to me by Ali on Alison Pages. This was part of her Pocket Pages book club reading list, and it was incredible. And it was also a new favourite for her as well, so glad we were on the same lines. But this is Pew by Catherine Lacey, and this tells the story of a person who is found in a pew of a church in a small, I want to say southern town, I can't remember whether that is actually specified, Southern American that is. And they give this person the name Pew, and it's told from Pew's perspective, and Pew gets passed around from house to house because they don't really know how to deal with them. Yeah, this crazy, almost cultish, interesting look at the way people who are unknown to society fit into society kind of ensues, because nobody can agree on what gender Pew is, whether Pew has a gender. These are some very traditionally, like, this town has a lot of traditional values, so they begin trying to enforce that on Pew, and Pew is just trying to make sense of how they even arrived in this town, how they got here while all this is going down. And it's written really interestingly, because Pew has no idea what's happening, their life before this town, anything. And they're trying to make sense of the world, and it's just written beautifully, and I don't really know how to say it. It's a nice short book, it's a really short read, you can get it through it in like an afternoon. It's like one of those nice ones that just is a nice self-contained little story that isn't going to take you a month to read. It felt really interesting, and one movie I can draw from that kind of feels very similar is Midsummer, because it feels like an outsider going into this town with its own traditions and values, and it culminates in sort of a ceremony that, while doesn't have the same sort of horrific aspects that the ending of Midsummer has, still has its own horrors, but more mentally, and it's very interesting. Number 3, here we go. Here's the ones that I really struggled to place. I feel like this one pretty much stayed in number 3 the whole time, but it felt like it could have been higher for me at times. And this is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I lost a parent to cancer 5 years ago this February, and I feel like there was a lot of reasons why I could go into this one apprehensively, because this is the memoir of Michelle Zauner of Japanese Breakfast, who lost her mum to cancer, and I went into it anyway, and I don't know whether that was the smartest decision or not, but I read it regardless. I got the audio book of it, which was read by Michelle Zauner as well, which had a really, really interesting personal element to it because it was read by her as well. And it tells a story of not only her losing her mum, but the relationship before her mum was diagnosed with cancer, the during and the after. And I feel like sometimes books about losing loved ones to cancer kind of focus on just the dying and maybe like the best memories of their past, and this really doesn't do that, because before the cancer there was tension between Michelle and her mother, and it was only after she was gone that she was able to really understand a lot of what her mother was trying to do. It also kind of emphasizes the difference between being raised in Korea, where her mother was raised, and how that raises you to become a mother in future, and the Western sensibility. There seemed to be a difference in the way the two of them wanted to receive and give love to one another, and they never really meshed on that. And it really didn't become that clear until after the passing, and until Michelle then found a love of Korean cooking that was brought on by her family, in particular her mother, that, yeah, I don't know, it left me feeling grateful for what I do have. And while I did lose a parent, it didn't feel too close to home. It didn't feel like I was ripping open a wound that I'd sealed up. It felt like its own story that was very different to mine. But again, it did make me feel really grateful for what I do have and what I did share with my father before he went. And of course I cried. It's not called crying in H Mart for nothing. Number two is the two books that I was on about. When I originally said this was a top 10, this is where the 11th came in, because I read both of these books this year in quick succession, and they really feel almost like they are one book, because they are both short story collections, and they are Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. And these tell the story of a cafe that has one particular seat where patrons can travel back in time to the same place. They cannot leave that seat, but to relive and rethink the past. But if they let their coffee get cold, they're stuck. Oh, it hit you. It dived into all the possibilities of scenarios where this would be important. One of the stories was about lovers that split in that restaurant. They split up because one wanted to move to a different country and the other one didn't. And all the things that were left unsaid could then be said, and how it changed the scenario, but not in the way that you'd have expected. And another scenario was of a man who had Alzheimer's, and his wife wanted to travel back to when was well again, just to see him and be remembered. And it was really heartfelt, and I cried a million times over. What's new here? I cry at books a heck of a lot, but yeah, this collection in general, beautiful, so gorgeous. You get to know the patrons, you get to know the staff, you get to have stories of times where the staff have had to use this chair and travel back in time themselves. It's so special. There's no way to explain it other than it's so special. And it's funny because the only thing that grabbed me was the cover originally. It was just like a cafe and a cat and a cup of coffee, and the idea of just the title, Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Oh yeah, it's just gonna be a cute little story about a cafe. No, here is all the feelings you could possibly have about a book in one. So yeah, hard hitting, but I loved it. I loved it. It made me cry so much. I will probably read some of these stories again this year, maybe more than, but maybe I might read the whole thing again. I think there's another set that needs to be translated, so if that comes out this year, you know I'm going to be on that. This was almost my number one, but something actually moved it off the top spot, and it very nearly didn't. But yeah, I love this series of books so much, and I couldn't really distinguish one from the other, which is why I wanted to put them just there as like a blanket. Yeah, that's my number two. Number one is House Arrest by K.A. Holt. You've probably never heard of it. It doesn't have very many ratings on Goodreads, but I found it on my Libby app. I was looking for poetry actually, and this was in the poetry section for some reason. It's a novel. It's not poetry, but it is written as if it was a journal. It's written by a kid who has got in trouble and is on house arrest, and his younger brother has some pretty serious health conditions that mean he requires an at-home nurse a lot of the time, and he can get very sick very easily. And oh my gosh, it was heartbreaking because everything that this kid did and wrote about was done with such good intentions, but just, it ruined a lot of stuff. And it's very easy to forget that kids always want the best and they want to do things with the best intentions, and sometimes it just doesn't happen. And it was so heartbreaking. I actually put the book down and full on sobbed. I didn't do the whole tears in the eyes carried on reading thing like I normally do. I put the book down and sobbed. My cat sat on my lap and was like, what the hell's going on? Are you okay? He never does that. And I think that's why I had to put this at number 1, because it just broke me. It broke more than crying in H Mart broke me. And crying in H Mart was a lot more relevant to me as a person. But yeah, this broke me. I can't even describe it. I ingested it in one sitting. Didn't get much sleep in the end that night, but I've read the book. I can't describe how much I feel about this book, and it's so underrated as well because really not many people have heard about it. Why haven't I heard about this from other people? This feels like such a word of mouth story. I just want you all to read it. I want you all to cry your hearts out. I do. And I'm very sorry about that. I'm sorry for the tears that I am going to cause you if you do read that, but yes. So that was a top 12. It was a top 12 in the end. It was the top 10%. So yes, I'm good at things. This took me an hour to record. I can't believe how much I've tried to talk. But if you're still here, thank you so much for sticking around. I hope these recommendations are what you're looking for. If you have read any of these, I'd love to know what you thought of them. I know some of my favourite books of the year have been 2 stars for other people, and I'd love to have that discussion. I'm not one of these people that will just slam on everybody's opinions if they're not the same as mine. But there you go. Like, thank you for being around. Thank you for checking in with me. I will make more videos this year. I will. It's my New Year's resolution. It actually is my New Year's resolution to make more videos because I've always loved making videos and I just never find the time for it. So I'm finding the time, even if it's on my lunch break and I've got a meeting in 10 minutes. Thank you for being around, and I'll see you next time.